Could you just let me answer the question? 4 or 5 years ago, when we were doing our manpower planning in the NHS, we actually believed there would be more care in the community. People would require acute hospital treatment less, because that was the theory at that time. I haven't heard anyone recently talk about let's put more money into the community and less into hospitals.
Well, you mean you sack nurses, close beds because...
That debate has just been forgotten about, but we downturned the numbers of nurses we've got in training. The facts are now, I've actually employed in my area 150 more nurses this year than I would have done in the planning stage 4 years ago. So we've caused our own problem.
Is the management a problem? Is that part of the difficulties of why we've got people waiting on trolleys?
I think we're each blaming each other. And management will blame the staff and the staff will blame the management. That's not the answer. And as regards beds...
What's the problem then? What is the answer?
Well, the answer is to train more nurses. They're now using carers as nurses. And at one time we had a lot of trained staff in the ward.
Is that what it is?
Excellent care.
Joe?
When I was in the ward, there were care assistants and auxiliaries looking after me. I'd had a very severe asthma attack. I ended up being harassed by a senile dementia woman who should have been in a geriatric ward. I ended up spending the night in the television room, desperately unhappy, desperately stressed out. And the whole reason was there wasn't proper trained staff. They didn't know what they were doing. They forgot to give me my medication. I had a severe chest infection. And it's complete mismanagement, also lack of funds, but also mismanagement, because
John, you were
the left hand doesn't know what the right's doing.
You were talking to Robert about lack of resources, just like Dr. Bennett there at the back talking about it. But is management also a problem? This perception that there's too many managers and not enough doctors and not enough nurses, that the money is going to the kind of periphery?
We need more doctors and nurses, there's no question about that, particularly in accident and emergency departments. But one point I would like to make to the Tory Member of Parliament is this idea of trauma centres. They want to have a small number of trauma centres in the country, and there was an experiment carried out comparing Stoke with Hull and Preston. The results of the experiments haven't been published yet, and yet the government seems to be wanting to go ahead and develop trauma centres. Now that means there's going to be a small number, and people can be bypassing their local hospitals to be taken to so-called centres of excellence with no proof that these centres give any better results whatsoever. And this is something that hasn't happened yet, and I think it should be prevented at all costs.
But I've read a dozen reports, some in this country, some in the US, some in other countries, that show that they do work.
They don't show that at all. They don't. I'm sorry, they don't. If you look in detail, they don't show that whatsoever.
Okay, but that's a debate for another time. Hugh, I know you've only just arrived, and we're grateful for you having coming, given the problems you had with the traffic this morning. We've been hearing a lot of people cases of relatives who've died, people who've been severely ill, not been able to get a bed, shunted from one hospital to another, left on trolleys for 17 hours. And we've argued about whether it's resources, or whether it's the management to blame, or whether it's staff. What are you going to do about it if you get into government next time?
I think the immediate thing to be done is to set up a computer network to show where the empty beds are.
Don't we have that?
We don't have it at the moment.
I was calling for that 13 years ago.
It would cost peanuts. We had a man who, from Bradford, in my part of the country, who died just last week because they couldn't find him a bed. They were phoning around dozens of hospitals in the region. They could all have it online.
What you mean?
With
so you're saying that while
it would cost £80 a hospital to buy them modems.
You're saying that whilst there may be problems in some areas, there are empty beds in others, which we could, if we had them all on computer, we could find them, we could identify them. Is that right, David?
It's totally inefficient management of the National Health Service. And that's the first thing you need to do.
Well, let's deal with that.
At the present time, there is a network in place for phoning around to look for intensive care beds. I don't know why this happens. I don't know why this happens, but whenever you find one area's intensive care beds are full, everybody's is as well, and that is the real problem.
But it's the doctors and nurses phoning around when they should be looking after patients.
It takes hours. It takes hours to phone round, and in those hours, in this particular case, the man died. He'd had a cardiac arrest. He went to his local hospital. They didn't have a bed. They spent hours phoning around, and in the end flew him 70 miles to Scarborough.
OK, so you're going to have a new computer system, which seems to be sensible, and I would have thought commonplace.
It would be cheap, I remember it would be sensible, but they don't do it because the health service has stopped cooperating.
That's a minor thing to do. It might be very important impact. Are you going to put more money in?
That's the first thing to do. The second thing to do is to...
You didn't say yes, did you, Hugh?
No.
Why didn't you say yes? If you are, you'd say, yes, we are, Robert. Of course we're going to put more money in. Lots of it. But you didn't say that.
Let me come back on that. The first thing we're going to do is use the empty beds we have. The second thing we're going to do is make proper priorities in the health service, if you can't depend upon the health service in an emergency when your life is at risk, then you can't depend on the health service at all. And those patients must be the ones who get priority. At the moment, thousands of millions of pounds a year are wasted on treatments that either...
So you're going to put the money in for those people who should take priority?
No, we're going to put the money into
You're going to take it from somewhere else?
Yes, and let me explain why.
No, quickly, Hugh.
The Royal College of Surgeons gave evidence to Parliament last year that something like £1,000 million worth of activity of treatments given in hospitals in the NHS either don't make patients better or actually make them worse.
Yes.
And what you need to do is root out that bad practice, those bad treatments, and spend the money on life-saving treatments at the time when people need them.
Watch out, Doctor. What about the impact upon staff of all this?
I think...
are staff partly also the cause, the problem, part of the problem, do you think?
No, I wouldn't accept that. I think staff are becoming very, very despondent. And I'm not just talking about A&E nurses and doctors. I'm an A&E nurse and a manager. But it's staff from other areas, porters, cleaners, the staff from on the wards and the levels as well. In the past, 2 to 5 years ago, if you'd have worked later or you'd have worked on your days off or on annual leave, then you could have met people's needs somehow by putting in some of yourself. But actually, we've reached a point where we're not able to do that anymore.
Why?
Because no matter how late you stay or how much time you put in, it is still not enough.
It's still going to be the same tomorrow.
Well, I feel a patient is not a customer. This gentleman in France is talking about a patient being a customer. No way. It's not a customer.
Well, you mean they're treated like customers here?
Yes, exactly. They're treated here. I come from France. The difference, there's a lot of difference. There's more money.
In France?
In France, there's a lot more money in the thing. They're in debt. But then it's a human right to be
But you say there's a difference. What, you mean the patients are treated differently by the staff in France than they are in Britain?
Oh, yes, definitely.
In what way?
There's a different kind of attitude. There's a service to the patient. It means that when the family comes with the patient, they are treated as a group. They are taken. They are straight away. Tests are done on the patient. They're offered tea, coffee, etc. They're treated as human beings.
And here they're treated as customers.
Here, I've experienced here the emergency. First, you arrive in a service which is often covered of dry blood. You sit the patient waiting there on the hard seat if he can sit up, even if he's in pain. Then you're seen by a nurse, and the nurse tells you, well, you'll have to wait, and then we'll call you in. And this is why, and for that you've got to wait 3 hours. Then after that you wait another 2 hours, put in a cubicle, nobody come and see you, and then after you bandage or whatever, you send home. This is not an emergency, no treatment. This is, it needs, there's a few points, I think.
I think let me leave it there.
Treated is a human right.
That's how an outsider sees it.
But
you're a customer, not a patient, not a human being.
I think that she's made a number of very valid points. I think we are indeed treating people. I'm a medical director of a hospital in South West Thames in a way that's sort of crisis management. We're taking people through in the best possible way we can with the numbers of staff we had. We're spending too long trying to find beds. We're spending too long phoning other hospitals.
You realise what you just said then? You're not dealing with the patients, you're dealing with the crisis created by not having enough resources to deal with the patients. You're managing the crisis, not treating the patient.
I think, yes, I think that's true. I think we're spending too much time looking for beds in our own hospital and elsewhere instead of looking after the patients.
And there's no modern equipment in this unit. They don't have straight away the X-ray machine, the scan, the ecography, whatever you call it.
We do have quite a lot of equipment.
But not modern equipment.
And it's quite modern.
Not in the emergency.
It's making us sound third world. We do sound third world, don't we?
I think we are verging. I think we're verging in that direction. If you look, I think Greece and Turkey are similar countries when you look at the amount we spend per person, and you look at Western Europe and ourselves, and we're way down the league. I think we get the service we pay for.
I certainly think I'm a sister in a busy accident and emergency department, and I can say I've listened to all these stories, and I know about patients staying on trolleys for 12 hours or 6 hours, and it's so frustrating because they're piling in the front door and you're desperate to get people onto a bed so that they can be in accident and emergency on a bed, but you have to make up your mind who you can deal with first.
No, I just feel I agree with this lady. Though the nurses and doctors do their best, I don't think there's actually enough care and communication.
Yes.
When my father
She was talking about attitudes, wasn't she?
Well,
she was talking
yeah.
about the way people are treated, and that's what you're saying.
Well, when my
tell the
hospital,
nurse, tell the nurse.
when Dad was in hospital for the 10 days, not once was my mother approached by a doctor, nor myself. We was up there all the time, and I hate to say this, but I've got to say it. My father was not washed. I was getting up there at 6:45 every morning to wash him in the end. Now, my dad, God, he would never really let me do that, but it got to such a state that he had to be washed. And I even, on the last day before he went into intensive care, had to try to shave him. I didn't know how to shave him.
What I'd like to ask is, where were the nurses, where were the staff? Were they sitting doing nothing, or were they doing other things?
But obviously, we've just been told by the nurse manager here you don't have time to sit doing nothing.
There was only about four. There was two doctors, nurses, sorry, and two ladies. That's all there was. And when I went out on one particular occasion, I said to the male nurse, "Could you come and help me to shave Dad?" He said, "Oh, I haven't got time." And it was like that. I haven't got time.
What should we do, Fiona? What should we do? I mean, there's lots of problems here. We haven't got. David alluded to the problems of the growing elderly population and long-stay beds. How do we deal with this? How do we create a proper health service?
It's a very difficult problem. It's a multifactorial problem. There isn't one answer to it. That means there are lots of problems. It's not one easy solution. The health authorities, the trusts, the doctors, the nurses, the general practitioners have all got to get their heads around the table and look at this problem.
But why aren't they doing that? Why haven't they been doing
I think you'll find in a lot of places they are. We commissioned a big piece of research just earlier this year which has highlighted many of these problems, and I hope that they can get together to act on them.
Let's hope that they can. Take care of yourselves. See you in the morning.
If you have a child who's hyperactive or fidgety or disruptive at school and can't